Glad you're here.
Glad to be here.
Got Dottie, we've got Tommy and Barbara, we've got Christine times two.
Christine squared.
That's right, Christine. Each their own unique individual, but sharing a name, and at least from here on the same side of the screen. So we got Mike here and Barbara here. In the room, they decided to brave the cold today.
Almost stayed home, but I said no.
Let's make a commitment, stick to it. That's great. I don't know about anybody else, but our girls had a 2-hour delay today. You make plans for a day, and again, I don't know about you all, but they never canceled school for us when it was 20 degrees. I'll tell you that much.
I know, they've gotten very wimpy.
Somebody said the buses won't start, and I was like, they'll start.
No, just because it was cold and not really even that cold.
Yeah, I might have a different concept of what really cold is. I think most of us probably do, but whatever.
Not Southern girl,
I'm sorry, Barbara.
not this Southern girl.
Right. Yeah, well, that's why I said almost all of us.
Tommy
Well,
had to go to play in it today.
Oh, yikes.
Yep, for a couple of hours.
Come home and thaw out.
Well, in the morning I had my
Camouflage.
my invisible carpenter suit. It's a camouflage like snowmobile suit and hunting suit. It wasn't warm, cold enough to wear it in the afternoon.
Okay.
Just
Days
hold
like
out till next weekend when it goes to 70.
Yeah.
this won't stick around for too long.
You know, when we used to go in and I had a beard and my icicles off my mustache and beard would look like the Kansas City Chiefs coach. That's when it was cold.
Yeah, they had a record temperature for their game, I think, that Kansas City game. Cold.
And I didn't see it, but I heard that Mahomes' helmet shattered when he got a hard head hit.
Yeah, part of it just kind of
Wow.
pretty scary. And Buffalo was so bad that they just had to move the game. But that's Buffalo too, so you'll have that.
But they sure came out strong.
Yeah, and my dad's a big Steeler fan. I even wore a Steeler jersey for that game, which I felt kind of yucky, but I thought, hey, for dad. And then they got creamed, so. All right. I've got 6:02 on all of my devices here. Let's go ahead and get started just to honor our time. And we have one who went home, even with a late start, early, sick from school. So I'll go check on her when we're done. But let's open up with a word of prayer. Good and gracious God, you call us now into your presence, surrounded your scripture, and we give you thanks that we have this gift of your holy scripture. Oh God, help us not just to read stories from days long past, but eternal truths that continue to speak and sing to us. Oh God, help us to learn, to grow, open our hearts and minds so that you might enter in. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So we're in Exodus chapter 12. Hope you're not too discouraged. We've been at this since September, and a brief pause for Advent, but here we are in chapter 12. And we read through some of chapter 12 last time, but then I said we'd circle back this time just to continue to emphasize some themes here. I know I talk a lot of junk, but you really can't overstate the central importance of the Passover to the entire biblical scripture. I was reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 10 today, like you do. And it's all about learning from the example of the Hebrews, how Christ is the Passover lamb, how they learned the lessons of faith and doubt in the wilderness. It all winds back, not to mention the Old Testament, through the law and the prophets that always touch back on this story, but really as the moment that we're in the story right now, as central to the identity of God's people. You're gonna get sick of this if you're not already, but for those of you who haven't been around, this Exodus story really is the central paradigm for the entire Bible. All of it has something to do with this central Exodus story. We would even go so far to say that Genesis, as amazing as Genesis is with the covenants and the stories and the timeline, is really more of the backstory. It answers a couple of questions. How did this all get here in the first place? What is God's past relationship with the chosen people? And how did we get to Egypt in the first place? That is the timeline that Genesis follows, and it heads specifically in this direction. How did we get to Egypt in the first place? And then you turn the page to Exodus 1, and we hear that the Pharaoh that knew Joseph died, and Joseph died, and a new Pharaoh arose that didn't know the Israelites. And so their oppression began. But remember that they had been in Egypt for a long time. There was a significant gap between Joseph's life and the life of the Israelites that we're reading about here in Exodus. Some say 400 years, but there's no way to know really for sure. But at some point during that stay in Egypt, the Israelite people really forgot about their relationship with God, about God's deeds of power and activity in the past, the covenants that God had made, although the names Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob seem to continue to be important. The actual name of God has been forgotten. And so we talked about the burning bush and about God sort of reintroducing himself to these people. And now we've grown, as we've read through the plagues, and that we've heard the conjunctions, so that my name might be known throughout my people and throughout Egypt. And so there's really a twofold mission here. Reintroducing Israel to God as the God of power, and the one who's going to look after them, the one who's going to take care of them, the one who is bent on seeing their freedom and their redemption, but also then power shown to Egypt, especially in this season after Epiphany. We remember that, especially in Christ, but even in these ancient stories, God always wants to be revealed to the world as powerful, as a savior, as the one who takes care of the oppressed, etc., etc., etc. In chapter 11, we heard about the final plague, a warning of the final plague. It very much followed into the pattern that we've gotten used to through the first 9 plagues. The warning, or let my people go, and Pharaoh saying no. We've had conversation about that word theodicy, which is the justice of God. Is it okay that God is causing all of this strife and pain to the Egyptians in order to free the people? But we remember that God is taking the long view here. God is about liberation and justice, and is willing to do what it takes so that he might be known again as the God of power and the God who fulfills covenant. So then we flip to chapter 12, and we hear about the first Passover. We read through this section last time, but I'm just going to quickly read through a few of the verses. First of all, we start with verse 2. This month shall mark for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Now, what did we say last time? If we had to put that in our own words, what is God saying to the people?
This is where you'll mark time from now on.
Exactly. Thank you, Christine. This is where you will begin marking time, or even to make it bigger, reality in your new identity begins now. We begin counting time from this moment forward. Tell the whole congregation that on the 10th of this month, they will take a lamb for each family, a lamb for each household. The household is too small for a whole lamb, it shall join its closest neighbors in obtaining one. The lamb shall be divided in proportion to the number of people who eat of it. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a year-old male. You may take it from the sheep or the goats. Jesus mentions sheep and goats in the gospel. It's really just that one time in Matthew chapter 25. Yeah. And seems to make a distinction between the sheep and the goats. But at least for now, the Passover lamb can come from the sheep or the goats. You keep it until the 14th day, and then you slaughter it at twilight. Again, you just can't overemphasize the connections here. When Jesus dies, the sun goes dark, just like it does at twilight. The temple curtain is torn in two, etc., etc. Take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the lamb that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. That sounds pretty good. Do you think that sounds pretty tasty?
No.
Oh, well, all right. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roast it over the fire with its head, legs, and inner organs. Okay, I'm out. But let none of it remain until morning. Anything that remains until morning you shall burn. This is how you shall eat it: your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. So why? Oh, it is the Passover of the Lord. Why will they eat of it like this?
Ready
So
to
that
go.
they're ready to go.
We won't get into the technicalities of what it means to gird your loins, guys, but yeah, they're ready to go. Sandals on their feet, staff in their hands. They're in a hurry. They are ready to set off.
I have a note that says the bitter herbs signify the bitterness of slavery.
Yeah, that's what I've read too, and I think that that's really, really such a neat detail. I mean, you'd think you'd want it to taste good, but again, maybe one last day as slaves, for tomorrow you shall be free. What about the unleavened bread? We're going to hear a lot about that coming up here, so it might be good to just mention that before we slow down a little bit. Unleavened bread. Does anybody, Christine, maybe you have a note there, or perhaps folks know what that means?
Well, I mean, naan is an unleavened bread that the Afghani family sells at church, isn't it?
Right.
For a donation, since we're being recorded. But yes.
Right.
Don't put our nonprofit status in jeopardy, Tommy Oates.
There was a bribe last Sunday. Tommy's taking Hafizullah to get his learner's permit, and they gave him naan as thank you.
That's awesome. That is awesome. It makes a great pizza. It's great for dipping in oil. So non-leavened means, does anybody?
That it doesn't rise.
Okay, it doesn't rise. Very good. And
It takes time for it to rise.
And have the yeast.
And that they could leave quickly at any time, not having to wait for the bread to rise.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, it makes the meal a lot quicker to bake it that way. I also read something interesting this week that I thought might be worth sharing. Since we're going to be getting into this whole unleavened bread thing, leaven, as it's in the Hebrew here, really means it's kind of a sourdough yeast, but the key is that it's from last month's harvest. And so if you keep it long enough, it becomes this kind of sour yeast. And so That's what folks would put into bread in order for it to rise. It has something to do with a festival that later on in Exodus will be called the Festival of Unleavened Bread. And it took place, real original, right? It takes place in the fall, and it takes place with the new grain, the freshly plucked grain. And so to make leavened bread would be to use what was kind of like last year's store. This is the making of bread with this year's store. It doesn't rise like last year's store would. And then that would be given either to the priests or eaten in commemoration of God giving the growth for their wheat. So I don't want to go down this sidetrack too much, but I've also been reading a lot about these festivals, and it appears, if we read closely, that we actually have two different festivals that are kind of being interwoven here. One would have been the sacrifice of a lamb by the shepherding, more nomadic community. And one is a feast of unleavened bread, which would be for more of the sedentary farming community, which makes sense. That's kind of both of their specialties. You offer the first and best to God. Here, they're really woven together so that, to me, it really speaks of community. This is now your community. Your central identity isn't as shepherd, farmer, whatever it might be, but now we're all in this together, especially as we take flight into the wilderness. We're all together as one. And so two or perhaps even more ancient festivals are kind of wrapped up together on this very special day. And the end result is safety from this plague. Okay, etc., etc. I will pass through the land of Egypt, verse 12. That night, and will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both human beings and animals. On all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague shall destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Okay. Any questions or comments about those first 13 verses?
You better be good at following directions.
It's kind of complicated, isn't it?
It is.
It's kind of complicated.
And you better hope you know someone that was going to tell you.
Yes. I wonder if that, I mentioned this last time, there's a gap here. In 10 days, you're going to do this. And we wondered perhaps the kind of practical reason for that is
Make sure you get the word
you
out.
spread the word of mouth here. This is a lot of people. Somebody last week said some hundreds of thousands. It'll specify later on. I'm not sure how many here, but this is a big community. And so in order to spread the word, and if I was Moses and Aaron, I'd be sitting there trying to take quick notes, like this needs to be done in a very specific way. We'll get to a lot more of that too when we start talking about the laws and ordinances, the tabernacle, even the 10 commandments. There are kind of some specifics that need to be followed. Okay, does anybody want to read us verse 14 through 20?
Will,
Thank you.
this day shall be a day of remembrance for you. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall observe it as a perpetual ordinance. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day into the 7th day shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day you shall hold a solemn assembly, and on the 7th day a solemn assembly. No work shall be done on those days, only what everyone must eat, that alone may be prepared by you. You shall observe the festival of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your companies out of the land of Egypt. You shall observe this day throughout your generations as a perpetual ordinance. In the first month, from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day, you shall eat unleavened bread. For 7 days no leaven shall be found in your houses. For whoever eats what is leavened shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether an alien or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all of your settlements, you shall eat unleavened bread.
Thank you very much. Okay, what do you notice about this set of verses?
Repeats everything twice.
At least twice. At least twice. You get to that second perpetual ordinance and you go, oh, okay. And then it just really does repeat. What do you think that is?
For one,
I'm sorry?
Tommy said emphasis for one thing,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's more like, I'm your God, and if you don't do what I say, woe be unto you. And there's no negotiating.
it puts it out as, the first day and the 7 and all that, but then nails it down for being on the 14th through the 21st. As to when this is. Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah, so it repeats for sure. And to our ears, it sounds basically exactly the same because of things like unleavened bread. If you eat unleavened bread, you're in trouble. This shall be a perpetual ordinance to you, for you. If we were being, if we were being purely historical critical, we might say there's a little evidence here that maybe more than one person was writing about this, and they kind of put two things together with slightly different emphasis. You will notice that in 18, it's very clear about which day it is. Verse 14 starts with this day. And so we could say, okay, well, which day was that? And so be sure to add in which day, the first month from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day, which is itself even a repetition. Earlier, it already told us on the 10th day you get your lamb, and on the 14th day you slaughter it at twilight. But certainly it is a 7-day festival. In the first iteration, 14 to 17, it talks about a solemn assembly on the first day and on the last day. No work is to be done that day, only the cooking. In the second iteration, from 18 to 20, it doesn't really mention that. So maybe perhaps repeating for the sake of being very clear about what they're to do, but we do notice little differences to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page. And these things certainly, whether it's whoever might be the author here, certainly written for posterity. This is meant to be read, memorized, and followed. Sorry, Christine.
The way I'm reading mine, it looks like from the first day to the 7th day, no unleavened bread. And then jumping down a few verses, the 14th day to the 21st day, no unleavened bread. What happens in that gap, that week in between the 7th day and the 14th day? Or
Having the festival that
that goes in
lasting
there?
a week. And then in the second part, they're talking about when the festival really begins on the first month on the 14th day. So it's really the same week.
It's just more specific.
It's just saying exactly when it's going to happen. It's not really on the first day of the year. It's the first day of the festival is what I'm seeing.
I gotcha. Okay.
I would agree. And I think it's important that we have both, because The first one, starting in verse 15, it's talking about the festival. It says this is a 7-day festival, and on the first day of the festival. And then down in verse 18, it gets more specific. The first day of the festival is the 14th day of the month.
Okay.
Yeah. What does perpetual ordinance mean?
Well,
And it will
perpetual-
never end.
Ongoing. Yeah. Will never end. Yeah, that's right. And God's going to get pretty mad at a few different points because the festivals and the Passover aren't being remembered as they should. But clearly, this remains, if not the central, certainly a central festival or remembrance for the Hebrew people perpetually. And I know you've heard it before, but in case we need a reminder, on the night in which he was betrayed, Jesus was having the Passover meal with his disciples. And so even especially as Lutherans, we hold sacraments to be very central to who we are, tangible, physical interaction with Christ. So even central to who we are goes right back to this story and how important it was. And even though it wasn't always perfect, it was important enough that 1,000 and some years later, Jesus was still insistent. Depends on which gospel you read, but in Luke they say, "Hey Jesus, it's the Passover. Where do you want us to go prepare to do this?" And if we read the gospel closely, we'll see that it was part of a week-long festival. And eventually, over time, each day became important and each day had a name. So we read in John's gospel that because it was the day of preparation, they didn't want the bodies to hang up on the cross. So it's all part of that same Hebrew festival. And so I'd have to say, it truly is a perpetual ordinance and something that we still honor.
Who's considered the alien or the native of the land?
Oh.
19, in 19.
Who's considered the alien or a native of the land?
Non-Jewish people.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very good. I'm gonna maybe mention too that, how many people grew up learning that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible? Anyone? Oh, good. Yeah, that's not true. So there are some traditions that hold that Moses is the author of the first 5 books of the Bible. This, at the end of verse 20, gives us some indication that this was written after they had already settled in Canaan. And that this is remember, not that they weren't writing things down along the way, and not that it's not true, it certainly is, but that this was more of a remembrance than it was like, there's a scribe taking this down in real time kind of thing. Which doesn't make it any less powerful, takes nothing away. In fact, it adds some layers of depth to it. And so the people are reminded of how important this is. It doesn't necessarily fit if the people are about to run out of Egypt to say in this land, but yeah, you can disagree if you want to, but that's kind of how I would read that. And nothing leavened for sure. To me, this is kind of a precursor to manna in the wilderness. We don't eat last year's stuff. We trust that God is going to give us enough as we move forward. Any other thoughts or questions about 14 through 20? All right. Is anybody willing to read us verses 21 through 28?
I'll read it.
Thanks, Barbara.
Then Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go, select lambs for your families, and slaughter the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and touch the lintel and the 2 doorposts with the blood in the basin. None of you shall go outside the door of your house until morning, for the Lord will pass through to strike down the Egyptians. When he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over that door and will not allow the destroyer to enter your houses to strike you down. You shall observe this rite as a perpetual ordinance for you and your children. When you come to the land that the Lord will give you, as he promised, you shall keep his observance. When your children ask you, 'What do you mean by this observance?' you shall say, 'It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, for he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he struck down the Egyptians but spared our houses.' And the people bowed down and worshipped. The Israelites went and did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron."
Very good. Thank you. Have we heard this before?
Passover? Is that what you're asking?
Oh, select lamb for your family, slaughter it, blood on the lintel and the doorposts. Have we heard that before?
Yes, sir.
Hmm?
Yes.
Yeah, just like 15 verses ago. Look at starting at 7. And
yeah.
well, yeah, 6 and 7. A little more detail here, though, but certainly not anything that we didn't already know. To me, unless you want to talk about anything else, to me, the interesting thing is the kind of dialogue between future parents and children. So let me ask kind of a big question. What do we think that the blood does? Especially if we're going to relate this to Jesus dying on the cross and we drink his blood at communion. What do we think the blood actually does?
It protects them.
Yeah. It is certainly a protection, yes. Is it some kind of a trick so that God won't mess up and kill Israelites on accident?
No, it's a clear marker of who the Israelites are, so that when the angel of death passes over, he can tell the difference between Israelites and ones who are not.
Yeah. I just think it's important to note that the blood doesn't somehow appease God. Like God couldn't do this without blood being shed, but it does have the power to turn away death. And it does promise freedom. So that when we get to the Gospels, we're not necessarily thinking about Jesus as some kind of an atonement sacrifice. There are lots of atonement sacrifices in the Old Testament. This just isn't one of them. You mentioned the angel of death, Christine.
Yes. That's only because of what I read.
I'm looking for that here.
Hold on.
That's the term I've always heard too, but what we read was talking about the Lord was saying a good bit of the time he wouldn't and would. And then at one point it talked about directing. Where was that?
I'm glancing back through here too. all the way
Here, there's a
into
note
11.
for verse 17 and 23. It says, each year the people would pause to remember the day when the destroyer, God's angel of death, passed over their homes. They gave thanks to God for saving them from death and bringing them out of a land of slavery and sin. So it wasn't mentioned actually in the verses that we read. That was just this explanation.
I've definitely heard that phrase before, and I'm a little bit surprised not to actually see it, at least not here in the NRSV. And like Tommy said, it's mostly he or even naming the Lord. That's interesting, though.
Maybe it's because we all saw the Charlton Heston movie.
That must be it. It's a pretty neat movie. It's really long. I was thinking of, oh boy,
Yeah,
Egypt.
in verse 3, like we were talking, for the Lord will pass through to strike down the Egyptians. When he sees the blood on the lintel and on the doorpost, the Lord will pass over that door and will not allow the destroyer to enter
There you go.
your strike you down.
The Destroyer. Oh boy, is that better or worse?
It sounds like there's two entities here involved with that verse.
Yeah, I'm interested to maybe follow up, read more. Are we thinking that there's some agent on behalf of God that's actually doing this, and what that might be connected to? But it's kind of the way that it's termed in our Bibles is a little frightening. I was thinking about the King of Egypt. I think it's the animated one from like the early 2000s, and it's that kind of dark wind that goes through to the different houses, and pretty scary stuff. But anyway, let's keep our eyes out for that. All right, and 28. Lo and behold, the Israelites went and did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. That's good news. Enjoy it while you can. They're not always going to do just what the Lord told Moses and Aaron they should do. And neither do we. All right. Would anybody read us through the next section, 29 through 32?
I'll read. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his officials and all the Egyptians, and there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. Then he summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, rise up and go away from my people, both you and the Israelites. Go worship the Lord, as you said. Take your flocks and your herds, and you said, and be gone, and bring a blessing on me too.
Sure, Pharaoh. So there it is. Lots of buildup here. Clearly, this is something new and different, even compared to the other plagues. But here's the actual 10th plague. And sad. There was not a house without someone dead. We've talked a lot about distinction, especially between the Israelites and the Egyptians, but what there doesn't seem to be a distinction in is any kind of power or class or wealth or influence I'm very struck by the firstborn of Pharaoh sitting on the throne and the firstborn of the prisoner who's in a dungeon, and the livestock. That seems unfair, but right. And what's the end result?
Pharaoh set them free.
Get out, go.
Get out of here. Yep. Yep. What does the Pharaoh tell them to go do?
Worship the Lord.
Yeah. So I know you remember from past weeks. What does the Pharaoh believe they want?
To just go for a few days out and worship the Lord and come back.
Oops, 3 days. That's kind of been the deal all along, hasn't it?
Yes.
All the way back to when God said to Moses, tell the Pharaoh everyone needs to leave and worship on my holy mountain for 3 days. But we knew that that wasn't true. And so when the Pharaoh says, go here, especially because of the stuff that is coming up, I think we need to remember that the Pharaoh thinks they're leaving for 3 days. This is an awful lot to go through for 3 days. There's been some inkling that the Pharaoh understood that they were up to no good, or that they were planning something maybe more than that. But as far as he's heard, this is a 3-day venture out into the wilderness and then back to Egypt.
But he doesn't mention anything about coming back. He just says, be gone.
That's true. That is true. And be gone. Yeah, I
But he
wonder.
also asks for a blessing, though. He still wants God to bless him, even though he's done all these awful things.
Yeah. I had to laugh a little bit at the end because, boy, that's a last ditch pitch for a blessing from a God who is clearly against you. But we go all the way back many moons ago to a comment that Eric Cole made. In a polytheistic culture, I mean, that might sound strange to us, but in a polytheistic culture, not as strange. There's a God for so many different things. This God clearly displays power for the ones that God favors. And so I call it like hedging your bets. In a polytheistic culture, you're a lot more likely to sort of hedge your bets. Sure, I can be a God too. But we know that that's not really what God wants.
So I would go just a little further with that, because this last plague clearly shows that the Egyptian gods have absolutely zero power from top to bottom. I mean, that was one of the 3 things that, God was doing these plagues to show, number one, to show the Israelites who and what God is. That there will be no other gods. I am the one. And the other one was, to show the Egyptians that same thing. Well, clearly, with not a single house untouched, he has got their attention fully. But I think also to show the complete powerlessness of all the gods. And the interesting thing about the firstborn is the fact that, the firstborn was often set aside and dedicated to, specific gods or specific, leaders, whatever. So, I mean, it just, shows that, hey, I got your firstborn, that's the best. I mean, even today, we often dedicate the firstborn, to God, and we'll see that throughout the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about the book that Prince Harry wrote. Anybody read that?
No.
Despair.
The Spare. It is kind of funny because, and he faced it probably more than anybody else, but even in modern times, you've got the heir and the spare. And so the firstborn not only set apart and dedicated in various ways, sometimes to sacrifice, but sometimes to elevated status or ministry or a special role. But certainly we'll run into this with Jacob and Esau and all kinds of folks back in Genesis. The firstborn was the man of the house, and this does say firstborn sons. I'm not trying to, but to take over everything and to take over the lion's share of responsibility in the absence of a father. So a massive blow to lose the firstborn son, and it does show that the Egyptian gods are powerless against what God is doing here. One of the things we've talked about is throughout these 10 plagues, it has in some way or another addressed several of the Egyptian gods in the pantheon and said, you couldn't stop me from doing this. The Egyptian god of the dead is Horus, I believe. And so in this case, it would be, I thought Horus had control of that. What happened? I don't think that all of Egypt is going to convert right away. Monotheism is still super rare, but the mold has been cast here, and the story will be told so many times that eventually, I mean, these days, majority of people in the world are monotheistic. So. Yeah, okay. Take your flocks and your herds, as you said, and be gone. And bring a blessing on me too. Well, it might be a little late for that, Pharaoh. Yeah, we got 15 minutes left. How about verses 33 to 42?
I'll read.
Okay.
And the Egyptians urged the people that they might send them out of the land in haste. For they said, we shall all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, having their kneading bowls bound up in their clothes on their shoulder. Now the children of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, and they had asked from the Egyptians articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they granted them what they requested. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. Then the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides children. A mixed multitude went up with them also, and flocks and herds, a great deal of livestock. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough which they had brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were driven out of Egypt and could not wait, nor had they prepared provisions for themselves. Now the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, on that very same day, it came to pass that all the armies of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It is a night of solemn observance to the Lord for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. This is that night of the Lord, a solemn observance for all the children of Israel throughout their generations.
Thank you very much. Very, very good. Okay. Well, let me just ask, what do you think is interesting here?
Not only did they get to escape, but they also took all the gold and silver from the Egyptians.
Yeah, and that's been part of the plan, which is we've kind of questioned and wondered about. God had changed the mind of the Egyptians so that they would give up their stuff to the Israelites.
But it sounds like I heard that before, but plundered means like they took everything. It's just like,
Yeah, plundered is a particular word, isn't it? I think makes me think of like pirates and
mhm.
Vikings and stuff. Yeah, so they plundered the Egyptians. Not only did they leave, but they took lots of important and valuable stuff, silver and gold and clothing. Um, yeah, what else?
Well, those were a whole lot of things that they then make the portable temple with, right?
One of the things, yeah. Yeah, the instruments with which to worship God, I think is a huge part of that, yeah. All right, and we get to some numbers here too, which is interesting. 600,000 men on foot, besides children. There's probably women there too. Otherwise, the perpetual generations aren't going to work out so well.
Or there could be a mixed crowd
Yeah, and a mixed crowd also.
also.
And is this the beginning of non-Hebrew people being drawn into the covenant or the story? Could be. Are these people going to wind up as this slaves or the aliens or non-natives that we talked about? This is a lot of people.
The Message Bible says there was also a crowd of riffraff.
I love the message.
Large flocks and herds of livestock.
Interesting.
Mine
Riffraff.
has a little gentler explanation. It says, the other people may have been Egyptians and others who were drawn to the Hebrews by God's mighty works and who decided to leave Egypt with them.
Yeah, I mean, when you see all of this occur, a lot of people who don't particularly, have anything at stake are going to go, "Where's my best chance?"
Yeah.
With these people who are getting wiped out are the ones who just won.
Yeah, they got a bunch of silver and gold too, and dough for bread. Yep, hedging their bets. I always want to be a little bit careful when we come across numbers in the Bible. This is not to take away anything, but to add layers of meaning. I don't know if anybody has a note or something about this number, 600,000, or about 430 years. But I just think we need to be a little bit careful about being too literal about that. Our Bible here says the number 600,000 is exaggerated to emphasize God's abundant blessing on the Israelites. This many men plus women and children would have totaled more than 2 million, more people than any nation had at that time.
Mm.
So, fine. Make of it what you will, but boy, that's an awful lot of people. There was a bunch. And also the 430 years. Got a note here about the 400 years in exile predicted in Genesis 15. But Exodus 6 says that Moses is among the fourth generation of Israelites in Egypt. So the reason we need to be careful is that a generation at that time was considered to be 160 years.
Phew.
These days we say it feels like you hear about a new one every few years, but 20 years, maybe 25 years.
I think what the note says is predicts 4 generations, approximately 160 years, which would kind of make sense if you're thinking a generation is 40 years as opposed to 160.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I would just warn, like if you start trying to do the math like let's say counting backward from Jesus or backward from David, it can get kind of tough. And remember that the Bible itself says a day for God is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. So I don't ever think it's really like a math problem necessarily. The point is they had generation after generation been in slavery in Egypt, and they had grown and multiplied, and God is leading them to their freedom. If that's what we take away from this, I think we're on the right track. If we're trying to sit here with a calculator and think like, how long would it take 2 million people to walk across the Red Sea? We'll wind up diminishing the story instead of getting the most out of it.
I agree. Math has never been my strong suit anyway.
But it's stuff like this, you take this and then the different predictions and timelines and stuff. And that's why at least once every generation, one of our generations, we've got people who are convinced that the end time is on this such and such particular date, and we're all still here. So unless we got left behind, sorry. But,
That's a good book, by the way.
yeah, sure. Good fantasy. I actually read a weekly preaching blog called Left Behind and Loving It.
I don't know if you guys have heard this story or not, but Glenna Sears' cousin called her and said, well, I'm sorry, we won't be seeing each other anymore when the rapture was supposed to occur. And she was so incensed that her cousin assumed she was going, and Glenna wasn't.
There can't be room for the Lutherans. I mean, yeah. I'd love to hear the next.
Linda didn't go into what she said or didn't say. Sorry.
Yeah, I would just love to hear that next phone conversation.
Really?
All right, we got about 4.5 minutes left. I'm going to read through verses 43 to 50.
So hold on one second, Pastor.
No,
Let's talk a little bit about those last couple of verses, because I've read in several places how that's kind of a foreshadowing of later times with Jesus and the Passover meal. And what's interesting, because they were supposed to hold a vigil. That's one of the traditions of Passover.
right.
And so that night, Jesus told his disciples, stay and pray with me. Of all nights, they should have been doing the vigil.
Oh, interesting.
And they couldn't. They kept falling asleep.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, and they kept, please stay awake. And can you not stay awake and pray with me 1 hour? Yeah. That's such a
they didn't do well in the vigil.
No, and it's important to point out because so much of what we read here carries over into especially the Passion. But I mean, again, you could go through so much of the scripture, and if you flip back to this and have a solid understanding of this, it really explains a lot. It really helps to understand why people do what they do. Yeah. Thank you, Eric. I'm just looking back through because I want to make sure we didn't miss anything else really important.
I got on a little late. Did you talk at all about how, the whole meal and the 4 different cups and what they signify?
Not that part. I don't know that it's been broken down quite like that yet.
Okay.
Just that the bitter herbs were to remind them of slavery, the bitterness of slavery.
Yeah. And we read about the lamb and roasting it over the fire and
My
inner
name is
organs.
Okay.
Welcome to
And all
tonight's
that.
as part of WAHFN prevention.
Yeah, because the four cups, I guess the first one, like you said, I think Christine mentioned is, supposed to remind them of the end of slavery. The next one was like, oh gosh, I can't remember them all now. I'll have to look it back up, but I was just curious if that had come up.
It
No.
did.
Yeah,
That's probably worthwhile to do before next week so that we can flesh that out a little bit. Are you talking about for a Seder?
Mhm. Yeah, because the whole Passover meal came out of, this whole Exodus story, because they're basically reliving the
The Exodus.
Exodus meal.
Mhm.
And so Jesus didn't
Right.
actually drink the last cup of wine until he was on the cross.
And the connection with the hyssop and the blood.
Uh-huh.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do a little more reading about that, and we can talk a little bit about that to start next time.
Okay. Yeah,
Um,
I'll go back and figure out where I had seen that.
yeah, you're good. And we'll not read anymore tonight, but maybe we'll close out with this. Once Jerusalem had been established as the capital of the Israelite Empire, basically, or at least the southern kingdom. It was important for Hebrews at some point to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem. Ideally, if you were close enough, you would always go to Jerusalem, and you would make sacrifices at the temple, retell the story, eat the Passover, etc. When the temple was destroyed again in the year 70 AD, after Jesus' life and death, it became a home ritual, and that is when the Seder meal was really born. The rabbinic culture set about rules about how to remember the different steps of the Exodus, including the Passover, through a symbolic meal called the Seder meal. So someone has mentioned to me doing that here during Holy Week. I don't know that it's really our place to do that, but to have some kind of a symbolic remembrance would probably be good, or invite a rabbi to preside. Would be
we've done that. And actually, Ken organized it one year, and he actually had a Rabbi Shaw that he went in and he actually did perform the Seder ritual, and we all brought some particular part of the meal and served it together. It was
Oh, cool.
real interesting. And then before that, the confirmand class had done it several times, different confirmand classes.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe Holly remembers that, but Grace has done Seder meals over the years. At least I can remember 3 times and maybe more.
Interesting. Very good.
But Ken Schmidt had the whole outline and the dialogue and everything. So if we wanted to do it, I mean, Ken already has it all organized.
Yeah, we could talk more about that. I probably prefer a rabbi, just so I don't know. Anyway, we're out of time. I want to honor your time. Thank you all so much for being here. Let's have a prayer to finish up. Gracious God, we thank you for this amazing story, for all the details that pique our interest and stir our faith. Thank you for time spent studying your scriptures. Oh God, it feeds our hearts and our souls. Gather us safely again next week. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.